invited to do this exhibition in Victoria, Texas at the Five Points Museum of Contemporary Art over a year and a half ago. And for this show, it's the first time it's ever been seen in the world. There's 27 digital drawings that I made and 19 ceramic sculptures. I also wrapped a car in a using digital media to wrap a car with one of my drawings. This show was conceived for this museum, and it's the first time it's ever been shown. So I broke the show down into four parts. I have the ceramics is one part, the digital drawings is another part. I have the automobile and the wallpaper of the museum I also designed, because this museum used to be a Lincoln car dealership that's been converted into a museum. The way I work is unlike a writer works. A writer could conceive a sentence, play with the words, change the words, so they could get their thought into one complete sentence. I work much more intuitively. I start with the material. The material begins to form shapes, or in the case of the drawings, lines. From them I start to recognize aspects of the drawings, or in the case of the sculptures, I recognize aspects of the shapes, and then during the process, which is a long process, like in the case of the drawings, a drawing could be done over a period of time, maybe 6 or 8 months, in terms of actually mining the lines that I have drawn randomly, and to get form a complete and total image. In the case of the ceramics itself is very fragile and goes into a kiln and changes. I'm using porcelain, which has the characteristics of deforming. So I layer the clay over a foam armature, and then different layers of porcelain is put on the foam. Then I do the first firing of the clay, and then start sanding the clay until it reveals yet other kinds of textures, then put back in the kiln, where the kiln then can deform it, and then I get the complete and total. I use the word phantom because what's revealed is not expected. Unlike a phantom where, they oftentimes refer to it in phantom limbs, that people have had their limbs cut off and they still feel their leg, or they feel the pain in their arm, whatever. It's like they're fleeting moments. They're fleeting moments only conceived in the mind. And in my case, they're conceived in the mind through visualization. When I see it, something that speaks to me, I keep it. Making phantoms real is through that recognition process. So during the process, when a phantom arrives into your mind, it comes and goes quickly. So I think of those in terms of thinking. So I might have a thought of something, and then something else happens and reveals to me visually, and then I recognize it. And that's what I'm calling the evidence that's left of the phantoms. The museum used to be a Lincoln car dealership, and one of the rules of having an exhibition at this museum is that a car must be in the exhibition. I was able to take the curator's father's vehicle and transform it by putting a drawing on the car and having it in the showroom of the museum. So when you enter the museum, you enter through the showroom. You see the car up against a large wallpaper mural, which is the wallpaper is the texture from one of my sculptures. So you have a black and white drawing on a black car, 1962 Oldsmobile, 98, and against a textured wall, which was from one of the textures from the sculpture. So that was my idea, that you would enter a museum through that space. Having a car with the drawing on it, I wanted a colored wall, so that when you see the museum from the street, you'll see the car, the wall, and then the video. And this video is somewhat hypnotic. And I thought that with the sound of the video and the hypnotic visual imagery that the video creates, I was hoping to attract people from the street into the museum. I started making drawings in the computer on a tablet. And I got the idea to do that when I was teaching someone how to draw over the internet. And I was giving the student assignments to draw, and when I realized that the student hadn't drawn it properly, I thought, well, let me show you how it's done. And I pulled on a tablet and started drawing so the student could see it over the internet. Then after doing that, I thought, well, why don't I just make some drawings on the computer? And then I started to do a series of drawings in the morning and in the evening. And I spent about 30 minutes making random marks into the computer, running it through a computer program that would then alter the images some more. And then at the end of the 30 minutes, it would take the computer another 15 or 20 minutes to finish the images, and then I'd have a finished drawing. Sometimes the drawings were interesting, and I kept those drawings. Sometimes the drawings weren't successful at all, and I'd throw them out. And I did these drawings through a series of layers. Months later, I would go through the layers, eliminating some layers, doubling some layers. Sometimes I would recognize images. I call this mining, where I would mine the images later on. And I started to go through I had 30 drawings at the time, and I would start to go through these 30 drawings, finding new images within them. So in a way, it's very much like in the spirit of automatic drawings that the Surrealists did in the early part of the 20th century, particularly Andre Masson and others in the Surrealist group. But using the computer, and also with the notion of being able to go back into it by discovery, that's how I started to do the digital drawings. And the drawings remained in the computer until I decided when to output them in. In this case, the drawings are outputted in 5 feet by almost 7 feet high. There's a great deal of difference between drawing on paper with a pencil or chalk or charcoal, as opposed to drawing in a computer. Well, when you're making a drawing on paper, and you decide, oh, I'm going to try some crazy texture, or I'm going to try something out, or I'm just going to get random with it, and you don't like the marks that you put on paper, when you go to erase it, it leaves behind sort of a ghost, and it's also very difficult to correct because the paper starts to break down. When you're drawing in a computer, you don't have that issue. You could try anything you want on a different layer. So if you don't like the layer, you could erase the layer, alter the layer. You could try different strokes. You could try different media through computerization and color. So I find that there's a lot of freedom in drawing on the computer that you don't have on paper. And the storage issue, which is if you make a lot of drawings, you have to put them somewhere and on paper. And with this computer, you can make as many drawings as you want and leave them in the computer and decide later how you're going to deal with them. Ceramics is like one of the oldest art forms that the world has ever known. And it was the beginning of civilization when they were able to design and make a storage vessel. That's how people were able to settle down from hunters-gatherers to actually creating villages. It goes back thousands of years. I was looking revisiting the sculptures of John Chamberlain's foam pieces that he made in the 1960s. And I realized that the foam degenerates over time. And so his sculptures that he made weren't permanent. I started to think, well, it's such beautiful shapes. Why couldn't I make them more permanent by introducing clay on top of the foam? After a lot of experimentation to make sure that the foam didn't shrink and crack, I started to spray clay onto the foam. In particular, I used porcelain, which has other kinds of issues of deforming and also the notion of preciousness. So that's how I started these sculptures. I started out very small, in the size of a sponge, and over a year period I started to make them 27, 28 inches high as I could make into the kiln. Later on I discovered other kinds of problems doing that. I also used cardboard, and I used other kinds of, experimented with other kind of materials, and the results, which are at the museum, are the best of the sculptures that were made during that time. Yeah, I want to thank Ann Herethus for giving me the opportunity to exhibit at the Five Points Museum of Contemporary Art here in Victoria, Texas. Her assistant, Maurice Roberts, chief curator, and I'd like to also thank Jim Herethus for discovering my work, and my assistant, Nicole McKenna. A number of people worked on the show, including Beecher Smith Stackhouse helped me with the digital files for the car, and the staff at the Five Points Museum. My email address is Tepper, T-E-P-P-E-R, at nyc.rr.com. I also have a webpage under irvingtepper.com or irvtepper.com, and you can also hear my music shows on mixcloud.com. Mixcloud.com, go to the search bar and type in Tepper, and you can hear my past radio shows.